Hi guys, welcome back. So in this video, we're going to be discussing about how when would short-run cost increase or decrease, and how would we graphically represent that. So we know that the cost, guys, is basically depends upon the price of the factors of production, because the cost is calculated for the factors of production, how much we are using them, right, or whatever the price of the factors of production is. And then it not only depends upon how much the cost does, but it also depends upon what is the productivity of the factors of production. So productivity basically refers to output per unit of output per unit of input. That's what productivity is, right? So technically what's going to happen is that when the productivity would go up, it means that more output is produced with the given inputs, or maybe more output, the same output is produced with less inputs now. So technically in both cases productivity would increase. So for every input there would be more output. Example, more output for every capital. For example, more output for, so if it's a, let's say it's a restaurant, so more output for every oven, more output for every per square meter of land, more output for every worker. So the output is basically increasing without having to sort of acquire more factors of production, acquire more input, which will actually cause your per unit costs to go down. So technically two things will impact your short run costs. They will increase or decrease depending upon the price and the productivity of the factors of production. So any change in them will actually cause changes in our cost, short run cost. And anything, remember guys, that causes the firms, we know that costs are divided into variable and fixed costs. So anything that causes your fixed cost or variable cost to change in the short run will actually shift the firm's cost of production, and would sort of graphically represented by a shift in your short run costs, right? So when could short-run costs change? We need to know this. So a decrease in the wage rate will, reduce your cost of production. When you say that the cost of production goes down, so technically when your wage rate goes down, that is when your input price for labor goes down, it will shift your marginal cost curve downwards. So technically you need to know which curve will shift, right? So your marginal curve will basically shift downwards. Secondly, since wages are wages are a variable cost, so your average variable cost curve will shift downward as well. That is, variable cost per unit will go down, and so would your average total cost curve go down as well, right? So marginal cost would fall, your average variable cost curve would go down, and your average total cost curves, all three curves would go down. Similarly, an increase in the wage rate will actually cause an upward shift in your marginal cost curve, average variable cost curve, and your average total cost curve. Similarly, when your raw material prices changes, it will shift your marginal cost, average variable cost, and average total cost curve up or down depending upon in which direction the raw material prices are going. And let's say that because of imposition of indirect taxes, so for example, if per unit tax is imposed, or specific tax is imposed, it will it will shift your, let's say, cost curves upwards, because it will increase the cost of production. So marginal cost curve will shift upwards, that is increase. Average variable cost curve will shift upwards, and average total cost will shift upwards as well. And let's say if it's a subsidy by the government, maybe so taxes and subsidies are representing government intervention. So government intervention could impact a firm's cost as well. So, a per unit subsidy would sort of shift your marginal cost curve, average variable cost curve, and your average total cost curve downwards. But on the other hand, let's suppose, although in theory, in economic theory, fixed cost does not changes in the short run, because the costs are fixed in the short run. Most of the factors of production are fixed, but and even fixed costs will not change in the short run. But let's say, let's assume that if it does changes, so let's say maybe rent goes up, although it practically doesn't in the short run, but let's say if it does, or maybe the interest rate changes in the short run, let's say, although in economic theory it won't change in the short run. So in that case, remember, whenever fixed costs would increase in the short run, your average total cost curve would shift upwards, but it will not affect your average variable cost, neither your marginal cost, since basically the fixed cost would not impact your marginal cost, right? Also, let's say maybe you're investing a lot in education, training, and specialization of labor, which will boost your labor productivity. It will shift your marginal cost curve, average cost curve, and average total cost curve downwards, right? So you need to know that whenever fixed costs will change, right, when the fixed cost, let's say, rises, it will shift the average fixed cost curve upwards. Your average fixed cost will go up, as well as your average cost will go up, but it will not change the marginal cost curve. Remember that, okay? So average fixed cost will go upward as well, average cost will go upward as well, but it won't shift your marginal cost curve. And if you talk about variable cost, so any change in variable cost would shift both your average cost and your marginal cost as well. So if you look at this diagram, for example, if this diagram is on the left shows us that what happens when your fixed cost goes up. So when your fixed cost goes up, you see that this is ATC1, this is AVC, right? So basically average total cost shifts upwards from ATC1 to ATC2, right? And your marginal cost is intersecting the minimum points of both ATC1 and ATC2, right? But you see your average variable cost curve is not shifting upwards because your fixed cost is increasing. So it will cause an upward shift in your average total cost curve. Your marginal cost and your average cost curve will not change. But on the other hand, if you see that whenever there's a rise in variable cost, so a rise in variable cost would cause your marginal cost curve to increase, or cause an upward, it will shift upwards, and your average cost curve both. So both will shift, right? Marginal cost and average cost curves both will shift, average total cost basically, right? So you can see that your marginal cost curve also shifts, right? So this is representing an upward shift from MC1 to MC2. It's representing an upward shift in the marginal cost curve. So when you're representing cost curves, you are not going to say inwards and outward shift. You're going to say upwards and downwards, right? When you're talking about demand supply diagrams, you're like outward inward shift, but this is not outward inward shift. You're talking about shift in cost curves. The correct terminology that we use is upward shift, downward shift. Okay, so marginal cost curve shifting upwards like this that I've shown in the diagram from MC1 to MC2. So that is representing an upward shift, representing an increase in marginal cost, right? If the marginal cost would have gone down, it would have shifted like this. Okay, so you can see that, and so is your average cost curve shifting upwards as well from AC1 to AC2. So, and you see that since a rise in variable cost shifts both these cost curves, MC1 shifts to MC2 and AC1 shifts to AC2. So MC2 is cutting the average cost curve 2 at its lowest point. So MC1 was cutting the AC1 at its lowest point at this point. We know that the marginal cost curve cuts the average cost curve at its lowest point. We've already studied those rules, right? So marginal cost curve, MC2 would cut the average cost 2 at its lowest point as well. So that's it. I mean, a bit of basics. You need to know this, that how would short-run cost curves be impacted, and how when your price of the factor of the production or your productivity of the factor of the production goes up and down, and how would we graphically draw this. Thank you so much, and see you in the next video.